The new CEO fired me, not realizing I was the only one who could speak Arabic with our biggest clients. She called me useless and said they needed younger energy, so I walked away. 4 days later, she regretted it. Sup, Reddit. Got fired on a Thursday morning. It didn't take long for them to get a hard reality check. Grab your popcorn and enjoy the shit show. The calendar invite showed up at 8:40 a.m. No subject line. Just, Room 5B required. Name's Garrett. 53 male, senior liaison for Middle Eastern operations. I spoke Arabic fluently, understood the difference between a handshake that closes a deal and one that ends a relationship, and I'd spent 3 years living in Sharjah before most of my colleagues could find it on a map. I didn't panic when I saw that invite, didn't call anyone, just closed my laptop, grabbed my jacket off the back of my chair, and walked toward the 5th floor like I was heading to grab coffee. The hallways felt quieter. A few people made eye contact and quickly looked away. That's how you know? When people who normally wave start treating you like a ghost, the writing's already on the wall. Room 5B was one of those sterile conference rooms with frosted glass and absolutely nothing on the walls. Just a long table, 3 chairs, and that faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner. Victoria was already sitting at the head of the table when I walked in. She'd been CEO for exactly 47 days, brought in from some venture capital firm after our previous CEO retired. The board loved her because she used words like optimization and strategic realignment in every sentence. The word around the office was that she'd been brought in specifically to trim the fat. She'd already cut 17 people in her first month, mostly middle managers and senior staff, the expensive ones, the ones with institutional knowledge and negotiated salaries, the ones who knew where all the bodies were buried. She had this annoying habit of sighing loudly whenever someone said something she considered beneath her, which was apparently most things most people said. She'd interrupt mid-sentence, finish people's points for them incorrectly, and then act offended when they tried to correct her. I'd watched her in a few all-hands meetings before this. Sitting next to Victoria was Denise from HR. She had a manila folder in front of her, and her pen was already uncapped. I sat down, folded my hands on the table, waited. Victoria glanced at her phone, picked it up, checked something, put it back down. Like this conversation was already taking longer than she'd budgeted for. She finally looked up. Didn't even bother with pleasantries. She had this way of speaking that was supposed to sound authoritative, but came off like someone who'd read too many leadership books. Mr. Nash, thank you for joining us. As you may be aware, we're undergoing some structural changes to better position Vanguard for future growth opportunities. I didn't respond. Just let the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable. She shifted in her seat. Your role has been identified as part of the legacy infrastructure that we're moving away from. We're consolidating functions and reallocating resources toward more modern frameworks. There it was. Legacy infrastructure. Like I was an outdated server rack or a phone system from the 90s. I was the only person in this entire building who spoke Arabic fluently, who understood Gulf business culture, who had personal relationships with clients worth over $8 million in annual maintenance contracts. And this woman who'd been here less than 2 months was calling me legacy infrastructure. She continued, her voice dripping with that rehearsed sympathy that never quite lands. I'm sure you understand. We need people who can adapt to the new direction. This industry is evolving, and frankly, we need younger energy. She let that word hang there, not even bothering to dress it up. Denise slid the manila folder across the table. Standard severance package. 3 months' pay, 60 days of extended health benefits, and a reference letter that someone had probably generated from a template. At the bottom was a line for my signature and a date. Victoria kept talking. Something about the company being grateful for my years of service. Something about the door always being open. What she didn't mention was the UAE delegation arriving Monday morning. What she didn't mention was the $8 million in pending contract renewals I'd personally negotiated over the past 14 months. What she definitely didn't mention was that Khalil Al-Farsi, the operations director of our largest Gulf client, had explicitly stated in writing that he would only continue working with Vanguard as long as I remained their primary contact. I reached for the folder, opened it, scanned the first page. They'd misspelled my middle name. Classic. I closed the folder and stood up. Victoria looked surprised, then annoyed. You don't want to review the terms? Maybe talk to someone before making a quick decision? I've reviewed them. My voice was calm. The terms are adequate. I'll have my desk cleared within the hour. Denise's pen was still frozen in midair. They never expect you to just accept it and leave with your dignity intact. They expect some kind of emotional breakdown they can document for legal protection. I picked up the folder. Good luck with the UAE meeting on Monday. You're going to need it. Her expression flickered. Just for a second. She had no idea what I was talking about. Hadn't bothered to check the calendar. Didn't know that Khalil and his entire technical team were flying in from Dubai to finalize the largest contract renewal in Vanguard's history. A deal I'd spent 14 months nurturing. A relationship I'd built from scratch after their previous American partners had insulted them so badly, they'd sworn off Western firms entirely. "I'm sorry, what meeting?" she asked. But I was already walking out. Let her figure it out on her own. Here's the thing about corporate America. They love to talk about global markets and international expansion. They put it on their websites, in their annual reports, in those glossy brochures they hand out at industry conferences. But when it comes to actually investing in the people who make those global relationships work, they treat us like interchangeable parts. Nobody at Vanguard ever asked how I got the Gulf contracts in the first place. Not once. Not during onboarding, not during performance reviews, not even when the renewals started stacking up year after year like clockwork. To them, it was just magic. Arab clients kept signing, kept expanding, kept referring their colleagues, and I was just the quiet guy who happened to be attached to that magic. They didn't know I'd spent my 20s living overseas. First in Jordan, working for an American oil services company that was trying to establish a foothold in the region. Then in the UAE, where I got hired by a local industrial maintenance firm and spent 3 years learning the real nuances of energy sector regulations, trade etiquette, and the difference between a negotiation that builds trust and one that destroys it permanently. I learned Arabic the hard way. Not in a classroom, but in equipment yards and refinery control rooms and late-night negotiations, where one wrong word could tank a multi-million-dollar contract. They didn't know about the 12-hour time zone shifts I worked without complaint. Taking calls at 3 a.m., because that's when it was convenient for a client in Riyadh. Rescheduling my entire life around Islamic holidays, because missing a greeting on Eid could set a relationship back months. They never saw the private messages from Khalil's operations manager. The ones that always opened with "Brother Garrett, your word is gold." The ones where he'd ask my opinion on matters that had nothing to do with our contracts because he trusted my discretion. When his son was considering engineering programs in the States, he asked me for recommendations. When his company was evaluating a new equipment vendor, he asked me to review the technical specs. That's the kind of trust that takes years to build and seconds to destroy. What Vanguard saw was a spreadsheet, 4 accounts under my name, revenue numbers that looked decent but not spectacular compared to the flashier domestic contracts. They assumed my work was mechanical: translation, email forwarding, basic coordination, entry-level stuff. They never traced the full scope. Compliance protection when regulations changed overnight. Real-time clause negotiation when a client's legal team raised objections at 2 a.m. their time. The crisis last year, when a miscommunication about equipment specifications threatened to unravel a deal that had taken 9 months to structure. One of our junior account managers had sent a quote with the wrong part numbers, and the client's procurement team thought we were trying to overcharge them by $50,000. By the time I found out, they'd already drafted a formal complaint and copied their legal department. 2 more days, and it would have been a breach of contract claim. I fixed that problem on a Sunday, flew to Dubai on my own dime, sat down with their CFO over strong coffee, walked through every line item personally, and explained that it was an honest clerical error. We signed the renewal 3 weeks later for 12% more than the original contract. Nobody knew about that trip. Nobody asked why my expense reports sometimes included weekend flights. They just saw the numbers and assumed everything was running smoothly because that's what I made it look like. The people who build things don't bother explaining how they work. They just keep them running. And the people who inherit those things rarely appreciate how complicated it all is until something breaks. I knew exactly what was going to break, and I knew exactly when. I spent the first 24 hours after getting fired doing absolutely nothing related to work. Didn't check email, didn't call any contacts, didn't update LinkedIn or start reaching out to recruiters. Instead, I drove to my brother's place. Danny's a high school shop teacher. He's also the only person in my life who can call me an idiot to my face and make it sound like a compliment. We grew up in a house where our dad worked pipeline stuff and our mom managed a hotel front desk. Nobody had business degrees. Nobody understood stock options. But everybody understood that you show up, you do the work, and you don't let anyone push you around. I showed up around 4 p.m. with a 6-pack of root brew and a bag of gas station chips. He looked up when I pulled in. "You look like someone ran over your dog and then backed up to check." Got fired. He wiped his hands on a rag that was dirtier than his hands. "Huh. The new lady? She called me legacy infrastructure. Danny snorted. Legacy infrastructure? That's a new one. Usually they just say you're not a culture fit or whatever. He tossed me a drink. So what did you actually do? Nothing. She's cutting costs. I'm expensive. You're also the only reason they have those Arab contracts, right? Yep. Danny shook his head slowly. So she's stupid. Massively. The dangerous kind of stupid, or the kind that fixes itself? I thought about it for a second. The kind that thinks it's smart. Ah, the worst kind. He went back to the engine block. Well, at least you won't have to watch it blow up from the inside. You can enjoy it from out here. His kids came home from practice around 6. I crashed in his guest room that night. First full night of sleep I'd had in months. Saturday morning, I drove home and spent the day cleaning my apartment. Saturday afternoon, my buddy Nico called. We've been friends since college. He runs a barbecue joint now, way out in the suburbs where rent is cheap and the health inspectors are friendly. Place is called Low and Slow, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I'd helped him negotiate a lease with an Arab landlord a few years back, which is how he knew about my language skills. The landlord tried to slip in a clause about automatic rent increases. I caught it. Nico got a better deal. He's never forgotten. Heard you got the axe, he said. No preamble. That's Nico. Word travels fast. Small industry. You okay? I'm fine. Actually feel better than I have in months. That's the first stage. Denial. Next comes anger, then binge eating my pulled pork. I laughed. First real laugh since walking out of room 5B. I appreciate the diagnosis. Seriously though, you need anything, you call me. I got a spare bedroom and unlimited access to smoked meats. On Sunday, I pulled every binder off my home office shelf. Physical paper, labeled by region, by client, by regulation type. Pages I'd annotated by hand, because some technical nuances don't translate well to digital formats. I sat on the floor and flipped through materials I hadn't looked at in years. Some were from deals that never closed. Some were from relationships that fizzled out before reaching the contract stage. But they all had one thing in common. They were mine, built by me. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew that one day the institutional knowledge would matter more than the institutional loyalty. That day had arrived. I spent Sunday evening making phone calls. Not to beg for a job, not to badmouth Vanguard, just to reconnect with people I'd worked with over the years. Former clients who'd moved to new companies. Colleagues from my UAE days who'd started their own firms. A procurement director in Bahrain named Yusuf, who'd once told me I was the only American who understood that business is about people, not contracts. The conversations were brief, catching up, planting seeds, letting people know I was available without sounding desperate. In this business, reputation travels faster than resumes. I told them all the same thing. Let me get through next week first. I have a feeling things are going to get interesting. The UAE delegation arrived at Vanguard's corporate headquarters at exactly 9 a.m. on Monday morning. 3 black SUVs pulled into the circular driveway. Khalil Al-Farsi stepped out first, wearing an immaculate charcoal suit with a keffiyeh draped over his shoulders. He was flanked by his operations manager, his legal counsel, and 2 technical specialists I recognized from previous site visits. I wasn't there to see any of this in person, obviously, but I heard about it within the hour. And the person who told me was Omar Zain. Omar, or Oz as everyone called him, was Vanguard's IT and security admin. Early 30s, ran on caffeine, spoke almost entirely in sarcasm. He wore the same 3-band t-shirts in rotation, had a collection of mechanical keyboards that he talked about, like other people talk about their children, and he'd developed a reputation for knowing everything that happened on the network before anyone else did. Oz and I had bonded a few years back, over a shared appreciation for absurd corporate behavior. He'd once described his job as watching adults make 6-figure decisions based on information they could have gotten from a 5-minute Google search. His text came in around 10:15 a.m. Bro, you need to hear this. Call me. I called him back. What's happening? Oh man. Oh man, oh man, oh man. He was laughing. Actually laughing. So the delegation shows up, right? Full VIP treatment. Victoria's got the conference room looking like a hotel lobby. Flowers, catering, the fancy coffee machine nobody knows how to use. She even made the receptionist wear a blazer, which, by the way, the receptionist is now very angry about. And they walked in. Khalil takes one look around, doesn't sit down, just stands there with his hands behind his back like he's inspecting troops. Very formal, very not impressed. Then he asks, and I quote, "Where is Brother Garrett?" I could hear Oz grinning through the phone. Victoria goes white, She does this little stammering thing where she's clearly trying to figure out who you even are because she definitely didn't memorize your name before firing you. Then she says something like, Mr. Nash is no longer with the company, but rest assured we have assembled a fully capable team to continue our partnership. Corporate word salad. The usual. How'd he respond? He didn't. Not at first. He just looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, real calm. We stated our requirements in writing. Mr. Nash was named specifically. This was not a suggestion. And the way he said it, man. Like he was explaining something to a kid who should have known better. Then what? Then he turns to his legal counsel, says something in Arabic, and they all stand up. Every single one of them. Like synchronized swimmers, except in suits. Yalla. Yeah. What's that mean? Let's go. It's an exit signal. Well, they definitely exited. The whole delegation. Gone before the coffee was even poured. One of the advisors stopped at the door and said something to the receptionist in Arabic. She didn't understand it, but she said it sounded like a blessing. Or a curse. Hard to tell with Arabic sometimes. Probably Allah yustur. Means, may God protect you. It's not a compliment in that context. Yeah, that tracks. Victoria just stood there watching them leave like someone had unplugged her. How much did the account represent again? 7.8 million annually. Plus the pending renewal that would have bumped it to 9. Plus the referral they were going to make to their partner company in Qatar, which was supposedly another 3 million. So, rough math, we're looking at around 12 million in current and future revenue that just walked out the door because someone didn't do her homework. I let out a low whistle. That's a lot of zeros. Victoria's in her office right now with the door closed. Pretty sure I heard something break. Might have been her ego. Might have been a lamp. Honestly, super satisfying either way. The rest of the week at Vanguard was apparently a masterclass in corporate panic. Oz kept me updated with a steady stream of observations, each one more entertaining than the last. Tuesday. HR is going through your old performance reviews trying to figure out what you actually did. They've been at it for 4 hours. Pretty sure they're more confused than when they started. Wednesday. Victoria tried to call Khalil directly. His assistant said he was unavailable. That's diplomat speak for lose this number. She then asked if we had anyone else who spoke Arabic. Someone suggested Google Translate. I wish I was joking. Thursday morning, the sales team sent an apology letter to the Kuwait account. They addressed it to Mr. Al Kuwait. That's not a name. That's the country. With Al in front of it. I'm losing my mind. Thursday afternoon, it got a request from the CEO's office to pull all your old email correspondence. Guess who drew the short straw? That last text was followed by a string of emojis that I interpreted as both complaint and opportunity. Here's the thing about Oz. He wasn't just IT. He was the guy who saw everything. Every email, every file, every internal communication that people thought was private. And when Victoria demanded that someone dig through my old work to figure out how to salvage the situation, Oz became what he later called the Arabic email archaeologist. He called me Thursday night. Dude, I've been going through your files all day. I had no idea you were doing this much. What did you find? Everything. Literally everything. You've got email threads in Arabic going back years. Cultural briefing documents you wrote for the sales team that they clearly never read. Attachment folders full of do not do this notes about client preferences. There's a whole file labeled Yalla Guidelines. That's basically a survival manual for not ticking off Gulf clients. I'd written those guidelines after watching 3 different junior account managers torpedo relationships by doing things like scheduling meetings during prayer times or sending a friendly follow-up on the first morning of Eid. There's also, Oz continued, an email from Khalil's legal counsel from about 8 months ago. Explicitly states that any changes to the account team must be communicated in advance and approved by their side. Victoria never saw it. Nobody ever saw it. It was just sitting in your sent folder waiting to become evidence. Evidence of what? Evidence that this wasn't replaceable work. Evidence that you were specifically named as the relationship anchor. Evidence that Victoria made a $7.8 million mistake without doing 5 minutes of homework. I was quiet for a moment. I'm putting together a report, Oz said. The board's going to want answers. I figure they should get the real ones. By the end of the second week, Vanguard's Gulf portfolio was falling apart. 2 accounts had frozen all pending renewals indefinitely. A third, a petrochemical services company in Kuwait that I'd been nurturing for the past year, sent a formal letter terminating preliminary negotiations entirely. They specifically cited concerns about organizational stability and relationship continuity. Corporate speak for, we don't trust you anymore. The fallout spread further than anyone expected. Khalil Al-Farsi didn't just leave that Monday morning meeting. He made phone calls. In the Gulf business world, relationships are connected like root systems. One company's opinion of you becomes everyone's opinion of you. And Khalil wasn't just anyone. He was one of the most respected operations directors in the UAE energy sector. When he talked, people listened. By Thursday, Vanguard's name was apparently something of a cautionary tale in regional energy circles. They fired the only person who understood the market. That tells you everything about their judgment. I heard this secondhand from 3 different contacts, each one telling me basically the same story. Victoria tried everything. She had the sales team send formal apology letters. She brought in an external consulting firm that specialized in cross-cultural business recovery, which sounds made up because it basically is. She even, according to Oz, tried to find another Arabic speaker on short notice. You should have seen the recruiter's face when Victoria described what she needed, Oz told me. Someone who speaks fluent Arabic, understands Gulf business culture, has existing relationships with regional energy clients, and can start immediately. The recruiter literally laughed on the video call. Then she muted herself for about 30 seconds, probably to finish laughing. I thought Victoria was going to fire her through the screen. The recruiter explained that someone with those qualifications would take at least 6 months to find, would command a salary significantly higher than what Vanguard had been paying me, and wouldn't be interested in joining a company that had just publicly embarrassed itself on the international stage. Victoria did not take this feedback well. Meanwhile, I was getting phone calls from people I hadn't talked to in years. Word had gotten around that I was available. A contact in Doha reached out about a consulting opportunity. An old colleague from my UAE days who'd started his own industrial services firm wanted to know if I'd consider a partnership. Yusuf from Bahrain called to say his company was expanding and needed someone to lead their international operations. I told them all the same thing. Give me a few weeks. Things are still developing. Danny called me that Saturday. How's unemployment treating you? Surprisingly well. I'm getting more job offers now than when I was employed. Funny how that works. The minute you stop needing a job, everyone wants to give you one. You want to come over? I'm grilling. Badly. But I'm grilling. I went. His backyard was a small patch of grass, between a fence and a deck that had seen better decades. He had one of those charcoal grills that requires an engineering degree to light properly, which explained why half the burgers were on fire and the other half were still raw. You need help with that? I need a flamethrower and possibly a priest, but help would be a start. I took over grill duty while Danny grabbed more root brew from the cooler. His kids came out briefly to check on the food situation, decided it was still inedible, and retreated back to their video games. The 14-year-old paused at the door long enough to ask if I was the uncle who got fired. Danny told him to go inside. Kid shrugged and left. He's not wrong, I said. He's also not helpful. Ignore him. So, Danny said, tell me about this Oz guy, the IT one. What about him? You trust him? I thought about it while flipping a burger that was finally approaching something resembling cooked. Yeah, actually. He's one of those people who hates corporate games so much that he's become accidentally trustworthy. No agenda. Just really entertained by watching the whole thing fall apart. He shook his head. You gonna go back if they ask? I thought about it. Depends on the terms. Danny pointed his spatula at me. Get paid. Whatever else happens, get paid. Oz called me on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after I'd been fired. Report's done, 37 pages, and it's beautiful. He'd been working on it since that Thursday night when he first started digging through my files. Now it was complete. A comprehensive timeline showing exactly what I'd done, exactly what warnings I'd flagged, exactly what documentation existed that Victoria had never bothered to read, including the email from Khalil's legal counsel that Khalil himself had referenced during the walkout. How are you getting it to the board? I'm not. Directly, anyway. That would make me a target, and I like my job. I'm giving it to Denise in HR. She's legally obligated to escalate material findings to General Counsel. General Counsel is legally obligated to brief the board on potential liability issues. Chain of custody, baby. My hands stay technically clean. The truth comes out. And Victoria gets to explain herself to a room full of people who actually know how to read a balance sheet. You're sneaky. I prefer strategically positioned. But yeah, little bit sneaky. The board meeting happened the following Tuesday. Lasted 4 hours. I heard about it afterward from 3 different sources, including Oz, who'd somehow managed to be troubleshooting network issues in the hallway outside the conference room for most of the afternoon. It was beautiful, he told me later. Victoria had apparently tried to frame the whole thing as a strategic realignment that encountered unexpected market resistance. Translation: we made a calculated decision that happened to be catastrophically wrong, but we'd like you to believe it was just bad luck. The board wasn't buying it. Brian, the chair, was an old-school energy guy who'd been in the industry for 40 years. He'd asked one simple question early in the meeting. Did anyone verify that this employee had specific contractual obligations with our Gulf clients before terminating his position? Victoria's answer was basically no. Brian followed up. And you didn't think that level of due diligence was relevant for accounts representing 8% of our annual revenue? There was apparently a long silence after that. Then Brian asked to see the email from Khalil's legal counsel. He read it out loud to the room, twice. The meeting adjourned without a formal resolution, but the damage was done. The board had seen the emails. They'd seen the cultural briefing documents. They'd seen the YALA guidelines that nobody had ever read. And they'd seen the legal notification that explicitly named me as contractually essential to the client relationship. Oz texted me that night with a single observation. Victoria's office is dark. Everyone else is still here. Draw your own conclusions. The next morning, I received a formal letter from Vanguard's general counsel. They wanted to discuss potential consulting arrangements and were open to flexible terms that acknowledged the value of institutional relationships. I showed it to Nico. They're begging. Pretty much. You gonna help them? Depends on what they're offering. Get paid. Get paid stupidly well. Everyone in my life apparently had the same advice. 6 weeks after I was fired, I walked back into Vanguard's headquarters. Not as an employee. As a consultant with a contract that made my previous salary look like pocket change. The negotiation had been almost too easy. They'd started with a lowball offer, trying to save face. I countered with terms that made their general counsel physically wince. They came back with something more reasonable. I rejected it and raised my rate by another 15%. They accepted the same day, but not before trying one last move. Buried in the third revision of the contract, on page 9, was a new clause. Consultant agrees to provide comprehensive knowledge transfer and training to designated Vanguard personnel as part of the engagement. I read it. Then I picked up my red pen, drew a single line through the entire paragraph, and wrote no in the margin. Sent it back within the hour. They signed without the clause, because they had no leverage and they knew it. Here's what the final contract included. A 6-month engagement at 3 times my former daily rate. Full autonomy over all Gulf client communications. No reporting requirements to Victoria or anyone on the executive team. Direct access to the board chair if needed. All communication through my attorney. Payment in advance, monthly, non-refundable. And a clause specifying that any termination of the consulting agreement before completion would result in full payment of the remaining contract value. No training. No knowledge transfer. No building my replacement on my own dime. Nico had helped me draft the initial terms. We'd sat at his place after closing time, scribbling on napkins. You're being too nice, he'd said. Add another 15%. That's ridiculous. They've already lost, 7 million? 8? Another chunk is a rounding error at this point. They're not paying for your time. They're paying for their screw-up. Make them feel it. They accepted within 48 hours. Because they had no choice. The damage was already done. The clients I'd built relationships with for years weren't interested in rebuilding trust with a company that had shown such poor judgment. But some of them were willing to pause their exit if I was back in the picture. Not working for Vanguard exactly. Working with Vanguard. My first day as a consultant, I walked through the Vanguard lobby like I'd never left. Except now I had a visitor badge instead of an employee ID and absolutely no obligation to attend any meeting I didn't want to attend. The receptionist recognized me and did a visible double take. I gave her a small wave. She looked confused, then amused. Word would spread through the building within the hour. The guy they'd fired was back, and he wasn't wearing an employee badge. I walked past Victoria's office. She was still CEO technically, though the board had installed what they called a strategic oversight committee that reviewed all her major decisions. Corporate speak for, we don't trust you anymore, but firing you would trigger your severance package and make us look even worse. She looked up when I passed. We made eye contact for about 2 seconds. I gave her a small nod. She looked away first. Oz caught up with me in the hallway. He was carrying his usual enormous coffee and wearing what appeared to be the same band t-shirt he'd worn the last time I saw him. Mashallah, the prodigal son returns. He said it loud enough that a few people in nearby cubicles looked up. One of them was from finance. She'd been at Vanguard longer than I had. She gave me a small nod. You've been practicing your Arabic. Yup. He fell into step beside me. So what's the plan? You gonna save their butts? I'm gonna stabilize what can be stabilized. 2 of the accounts are probably gone for good. Khalil's team doesn't trust anyone here anymore, but he's willing to talk if I'm the one doing the talking. And Victoria just has to sit there and watch you fix her mess? That's the idea. Oz grinned. Beautiful. You know what this is? This is professional wrestling. You're the good guy making his big return. She's the villain getting what's coming to her. And I'm the announcer providing color commentary. The next 3 months were intense. I flew to Dubai twice, met with Khalil's team personally, and slowly rebuilt the trust that Victoria had destroyed in 15 minutes of arrogance. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't just snap back together. It takes proof, consistency, showing up again and again until people believe you're actually going to stick around. The first trip was mostly damage control. Khalil was cordial but reserved. His legal counsel asked pointed questions about Vanguard's organizational stability. I answered honestly. The company had made a mistake, the board was addressing it, and I was back in a role with full autonomy. The second trip was different. Khalil invited me to dinner at his home. In Gulf business culture, that's a big deal. It means you've moved from vendor to trusted contact. We talked about his son's engineering program, about regional energy policy, about the challenges of working with American companies who didn't understand that relationships aren't line items you can cut from a budget. By the end of that dinner, the account was saved. Not fully restored to where it had been, but stable. Moving forward instead of falling apart. I salvaged 2 of the 4 endangered accounts. The other 2 were gone, lost to competitors who'd been circling like sharks since the walkout started making the rounds in industry circles. But I managed to negotiate exit terms that didn't include lawsuits or formal complaints. Given how badly things could have gone, that was actually a win. The total financial damage was around $6 million in lost contracts and another $2 million in cleanup costs. Legal fees, consulting fees, travel expenses, not as bad as it could have been, but bad enough that the board was asking hard questions about how this had happened in the first place. Victoria resigned 4 months after firing me. The official statement said she was pursuing other opportunities to leverage her strategic vision. The real story, according to Oz, was that the board had given her a choice: resign with dignity or be terminated for cause with the full documentation attached to her permanent record. She chose door number 1. Smart move. I heard she went to work for a consulting firm in Austin, one of those places that helps companies optimize their human capital strategies. I genuinely hoped she learned something, but I wasn't counting on it. My consulting contract with Vanguard ended after 6 months. By then, I'd already accepted a permanent position with Yusuf's firm in Bahrain, head of international operations, based in the Gulf with regular trips back to the States. Better salary, better title, better culture. People who actually understood that you don't build a business by cutting the people who built your relationships. The offer had come together over a series of phone calls and one very long dinner in Manama. Yusuf laid out his vision, expanding into new markets, building partnerships across the region, competing with the American firms who kept tripping over cultural landmines they didn't even know existed. He needed someone the Gulf clients would trust. You're not just a liaison, he'd said. You're a bridge. And bridges are hard to build. And the best part? Khalil Al-Farsi moved his contracts to Yusuf's company, specifically because I was there. $7.8 million in annual business, transferred directly because of a relationship. A relationship built over years of showing up, keeping promises, and understanding that business in this part of the world runs on trust. Danny came to my going-away party at Nico's barbecue place. My brother, my best friend, and about 30 other people who'd watched the whole thing unfold over 6 months. The place was packed. Nico had closed low and slow early, specifically for the occasion, which meant unlimited access to his smoker and a tab I was definitely going to regret come morning. Worth every penny, though. Danny was telling the story of Victoria's resignation to a group of people who'd never met her, but hated her on principle. He'd gotten surprisingly good at the impression over the past few months. "We need younger energy," he said in a high-pitched voice, doing air quotes with his fingers. The whole table cracked up. Nico came out from behind the counter with a fresh tray of brisket, still steaming. All right, toast time. Everybody grab a glass." Danny raised his glass. "To institutional knowledge, and the idiots who don't appreciate it until it's gone." Nico added, "And to getting paid. Stupidly, ridiculously, obscenely well." Oz had driven down from the city specifically for the party. "Wouldn't miss it," he said. He raised his own glass. "And to the Arabic email archaeologist, without whom none of this would have been properly documented and delivered to the appropriate oversight authorities." I looked around at the people who'd stuck with me through the whole thing. These were the relationships that actually mattered, the ones that showed up when things got hard. I raised my glass. Victoria learned her lesson at the cost of millions of dollars in her own career. I learned mine too. Some names can't be replaced. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned forever. And now? The Gulf sun is brutal. The coffee is stronger than anything I've ever had. And when clients ask who's handling the relationship, there's only one answer. Brother Garrett. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.